Good afternoon and welcome to this broadcast from Cardiff Metropolitan University. Prynhawn da a chroeso i'r darllediad hwn gan Brifysgol Metropolitan Cardydd. It's midday and time for the fourth episode of our summer professional webinar series produced by the Cardiff Partnership for Initial Teacher Education. The webinar was originally broadcast earlier this year. Your presenters today are Emmajane Milton from Cardiff University and Sally Bethell from Cardiff Metropolitan University. Today's webinar is introduced by the Director of Teacher Education and Professional Learning, Dr Anna Bryant.
Croeso mawr i chi gyd i'r Partneriaeth Caerdydd, a pleser mawr heno yw i gyflwyno pedwerydd webinar yn y gyfres eleni, a fydd yn ffocysu o amgylch mentora, safbwyntio mentora, meithrin athrawon drwy ddysgu proffesiynol cyfoethog. A warm welcome to you all to the fourth in the series of the Cardiff IT Partnership Research Webinars, which focuses tonight on mentoring, specifically the perspectives of mentoring, nurturing teachers through rich professional learning. We do really hope that these webinars are beginning to support you in your discussions on how research and professional practice talk to each other. Essentially then, that lies within our research-informed clinical practice model that we enact in the partnership. As a reminder, these webinars are recorded and are also available on Teams link for a month after the webinar. And we've also got a channel on the Cardiff IT Partnership Teams site where we will update each presentation and webinar on a monthly basis. Tonight, we'll also dedicate the second part of the webinar for 20 minutes of questions, and we'll also have an opportunity for 10 minutes. We'd really like your generic feedback on the webinars so far in the comment function. I know we've received some really good questions, so I'm really looking forward to that. And please submit questions in the chat function throughout the presentations tonight, and they will be picked up at the end of the presentation. So without further ado, it gives me great pleasure to introduce both Sally Bethell, who is our Senior Lecturer in Physical Education and PGCE, and Sally heads up our mentoring programme and has also undertaken her professional doctorate or ED on mentoring and has done some really good work around this agenda. Delighted also to welcome tonight Emmajane. Emmajane is a reader at Cardiff University and has worked in education for 20 years, enjoying a wide range of senior leadership roles within academia, policy development and statutory school sector. Emmajane is chair of the IPDA Cymru, and her research interests are focused on professional learning, educative mentoring, and the recruitment and retention of education professionals. So I'd like to hand over now to Sally Bethell, who will start the webinar and the presentation tonight.
Thank you very much, Anna. This afternoon, I'd just like to share how research and practice has informed the development of Cardiff Partnership's mentoring provision. So I'd firstly like to look at the drivers for change, the reason why we've actually bothered to change our mentoring provision. And firstly, there was a lot of government scrutiny, looking at really the shortcomings of provision in ITE. There was the Tabara review, there's a report from OECD, a report from Furlong, all which sort of highlighted shortcomings in IT provision. And then there was a thematic report on mentoring by Estin that raised concerns about how effective mentoring was. We've also got a new curriculum for Wales, which we need a workforce that is appropriate to deliver it. We've got newly accredited providers of IT in Wales, and the programmes need to reflect the changes that have been identified in these previous reports. However, all the things that have been identified, there is still mentoring as a central part of IT provision. So the evidence suggests that we need to do mentoring better, and we've now got an opportunity to do things in a different way. So as Anna said, my professional research interest is in mentoring, but I'm also a practitioner. I've been a mentor, I've been a senior mentor, and obviously now I work with mentors in schools. So, I've been involved in helping to develop this mentoring process. We used a co-construction approach with our work stream for mentoring, involving senior mentors, mentors from school and university tutors. So we worked as a team to put together our mentoring programme. Partially it was informed by a systematic review of literature that I'd undertaken as part of my Prof Doc, looking at what the literature says in general about mentoring and specifically in PE. But we also use the experiences of our practicing senior mentors and mentors. They have a wealth of experience and knowledge that we wanted to integrate with the literature. And as a result of this teamwork, we had certain outcomes. We were able to identify the breadth of the role that we wanted for our mentors in Cardiff Partnership. We were able to identify what are the attributes that, if you've got this role, make you effective. We explored where and how student teachers get their knowledge from to inform their practice and how that might be acquired. And if we know what the knowledge is that we want, or where the knowledge can come from, what were the strategies that mentors could employ to facilitate the acquisition of this knowledge? So we had an exploration around that. And the outcome of that was we were able to produce a model, and we've got a nice graphic that shows how our mentors would be supported. And we put together a training package for senior mentors to use in school with their mentoring team. One, to develop the philosophy of a clinical practice, but also to explore the breadth of the role, the attributes that they'll need to employ to be able to effectively support our student teachers. So one of the things we did was we looked at what we considered to be the fundamental aspects of mentoring. And there were three aspects we identified. The first one, the professional learning, the integrating research and practice through the clinical practice model, that's a new aspect of mentoring for us, I think. So we might have had little bits of this in our previous models, but this is a significant change to our mentoring model. But this wasn't to sort of say we know that the mentoring, the relational part of the mentoring role has always been a strong feature of mentoring in Cardiff Partnership. We want to keep that, and we identified that as something that's really important for the support and challenge of our students. We've also had an awful lot of emphasis on assessment of student teachers, and that's probably a reflection of the culture of education, not just in Wales. But the use of informal feedback, the almost AFL type strategies that mentors use on a day-to-day basis with students to help them develop their practice. And then the very formal guidance and feedback that ensures that we have a profile of our students against the professional standards. And we are the gatekeepers of the profession, so that retains its sort of presence in our mentoring. What we did next was we said, well, OK, if that is what the range of the role is, what is it that our mentors need to bring to the role to be effective in it? And we used literature to help us here, but our mentors and our senior mentors, we looked at the language around it and how we could structure it to identify these attributes. And I think you can see from the screen, there are a lot of attributes, there are a lot of things that we would like our mentors to bring to the role, or be able to develop once they're in the role. You know, everybody would like to develop, and it is a professional learning opportunity. But I think it demonstrates how skillful the role of a really effective mentor is. We also have advocated in training with our senior mentors really strongly that it's really important to select mentors, and that using this list of attributes would be an effective way of doing that. When I did some interviews with some of my PE mentors, they had difficulty articulating their roles sometimes, the range of things that they did, because we haven't been familiar with identifying those. So it was hoped this would help articulate the role. But also mentors were saying that they had put their hand up because it was either their turn or that they were really willing. There wasn't a selection process. And in a review of literature by Hobson et al., they'd suggested that actually being willing isn't enough. You also need to be able, so that senior management should actually be selecting mentors to help make sure that this role is effectively done. And if I refer back to that list, there's a couple of features in there, or a couple of attributes that I don't think people would have identified as part of their mentoring role before. Part of it is, obviously we want our new teachers to be able to deliver the new curriculum for Wales. And the strong feature of education at the moment is this idea of engagement in research and inquiry. Well, we need our mentors to be involved in this as well, so that they can support our student teachers, because it's not just for this year. They need to have these skills because they're going to be involved in this profession. It's a career-long profession. But it also enables them to look at things from different perspectives and have different insights, which will allow them to solve problems in different ways. And we want our mentors to take ownership of this and plan opportunities for research and innovation, whether it be in their subject area or in their phase area. So there's a significant shift in integrating research and practice. Traditionally, in the mid-1990s, there was more a practice of, we will either, as a mentor, I would show you what to do and you can copy me and then you can just go and do that. So an apprenticeship model, or you go and try what you like, trial and error type approach. And although those occasionally have a place, we need more approaches, more appropriate approaches. I think people would now go, they're probably not the best approaches we could be using. So there's a shift away from traditional practice and a more looking at research and inquiry to facilitate professional learning. Now, there are numerous ways that student teachers can acquire their knowledge. And I really like this continuum from McIntyre that looks at the range from practice to research. So the idea that, we've got a craft in our classroom, we can observe, we can do in the classroom. It's very practical. And then at the other end, we have much more abstract, where we're looking at research findings and conclusions. But I think the bits in between are where we would say there is a marriage of research and practice. It's really useful for a student teacher to be able to observe a practicing teacher who's good at something, but then who would talk to them and articulate why they had done what they've done. It's important that our student teachers can practice something and then go through a reflective process, either being led through that by somebody else, like their mentor, or using the template type idea. But we know there's been a shift in culture with research being involved, or schools being involved with research. So we know there is much more action research going on. We know we have research schools or schools involved in research and networks. So the middle of this continuum is a much stronger feature in Welsh education at the moment. And our student teachers could be involved in that, but they need mentors to bring them into that environment. They need to be inducted into that. They need to know to access practical literature, so things like TES or subject journals, where they can get practical advice on things that they might like to try as part of their craft of the classroom. There's reviews of literature that pull together themes, that synthesize information on particular themes. And then we have, this pure research where people have conducted, rigorous research that has findings and conclusions, where students can take that and go, well, what I'm seeing is this, how does that match up to the research, and articulate that with a mentor. So we've got this range of places that knowledge could come from. And what we really need now is for our mentors to use approaches that access that range of sources of knowledge. So when we were working in our work stream, we investigated, well, what might be these approaches to research and inquiry that mentors could use to facilitate student teachers' knowledge. And we came up with the range of things that are on the screen. Now, anybody who's familiar with Cardiff Partnership and mentoring will have seen this we've got a little clinical practice guide that looks at these aspects in a lot more detail. So, for instance, if we were saying that we wanted our students to do something quite practical, which is go and sit in a classroom and observe, our mentors would help, that leadership part. They would set that observation up because it might not be them that they're going to observe. And a student teacher needs to have a really clear focus about what it is they're going to observe. They need to then be able to do that and come back and talk about it, because particularly initially, student teachers, I think, find it quite hard to decipher what's going on. Teachers are very, very skilled. They do lots of things automatically, so they can make decisions that perhaps they need to articulate afterwards, so it becomes obvious to a student teacher, oh, you did that for that reason. That was a calculated decision. So an observation on its own perhaps is not as useful to a student teacher as an observation with a learning conversation. And we did quite a lot of thinking, I guess, around learning conversations and how they are probably quite critical to lots of approaches to research and inquiry-based learning. If I send my student off to research something and say, go and find some literature on X or Y, then to come back and be able to articulate what they've found and then maybe go and look for it in their teaching or apply it in their teaching requires that learning conversation. And a learning conversation isn't a chat. It's something that's much more focused, much more deliberate. It's planned for. So we've tried to encourage that our student teachers would look at a whole variety of these aspects with our student teachers to develop their practice. I think one of the other features here, the idea of collaborative planning and teaching, if you're a mentor or a senior mentor with our programme, you'll know that part of their timetabled time is on team teaching, on sort of this emphasis that we'd like them to have the opportunity to work with somebody else, to plan, to teach, to review. And again, that's quite practice-based, but there's an element of inquiry in there. We want them to be curious and interested. Also, with the learning timetables that our student teachers have, there is a reasonable amount of time assigned to research inquiry. And all these things could be part of that timetable at different stages, depending on what it is we want our students to investigate. So we spent time putting together a resource. We took time with our senior mentors to explore this so that when they go back into their school, they could suggest with their mentors that these might be approaches that they would like to use with their student teacher or direct them when they're doing research and inquiry time. And I think that brings me back really to the identification of the specific aspects of mentoring. The professional learning is definitely an element of our new mentoring program that's a work in progress. Our program has been going for 18 months and 12 months of that has been COVID. So the idea that we could change everything straight away is probably unreasonable, but this is an element that we're really focusing on developing. What we're not trying to say is, though, that the relational part of a mentoring role is any less important. We know that our student teachers need to be supported. We know that some of them need to be challenged and challenged appropriately. So that element of support and challenge is still there. I think for clinical practice too, that's going to be a really important part as our students move from an experience where it's been virtual, where they've had a lack of physical contact with the school environment. And that's not to say mentors haven't done a very, very good job at supporting in very difficult conditions. But students are going to need to be reintegrated into the physical environment. And that induction phase, that bit of the nuance of your school and the physical environment, our mentors are going to be vital for that. And I think as well, the assessment part of a mentoring role, which is slightly different. I think if you talk about mentoring in general, it's not something that is usually associated with mentoring, the idea that you make judgments. And that's probably a unique feature of mentoring in initial teacher education, but it is a feature of the mentoring that we do. And so continuing to use the informal AFL type approaches is going to continue to be important, but also tracking very carefully student teachers' profiles, because they're going to be slightly different this year because of certain experiences being different. We need to ensure that our student teachers have a profile that it shows their strength, because students have done remarkable things in the last few months. We need to make sure that we are able to show that in their profile. But there are going to be elements where perhaps they haven't had the experiences and they will need additional support next year when they go into their first posts. So we've got quite a lot of work still to do with our mentoring. We have very, very willing people. We have very, very able people in the mentoring roles, in our senior mentoring roles. And it's been a real joy to work on this aspect with the initial creation of it, and then working with senior mentors in school and doing professional learning with our mentors. And I guess my question now to people would be, what should we do next to support our mentors? I know we can't ask for questions sort of loud here, but they can go into the chat function. If anybody has got suggestions about what perhaps would be good things for you as a mentor moving forwards, for us to consider in developing the programme, I'd love that to go into the chat. I'd love you to ask any questions that you have of me at the end. I'm going to leave my presentation now, and I'm going to move over to Emmajane, who will do the next part of this evening's webinar. Thank you very much for listening to me.
Thanks so much, Sally. Okay, I'm delighted to be asked to contribute today. And so I'm drawing on a range of experiences, having been a school leader and more recently director of the Masters in Educational Practice in Wales, and now working in a range of contexts with ITE providers across Wales and of course many schools and their staff. And you'll all no doubt be incredibly familiar with all of the context, the current context in Wales in this time of unprecedented change. We've so much going on. We have our national mission for education, and as part of that, many things have been or are continuing to be reformed. We have the revised professional standards for teachers and leaders, a new national approach to professional learning, which includes the development of a new Wales-wide master's programme, significant reform, as Sally's already mentioned, about initial teacher education. We've set up the new National Academy for Educational Leadership. There's a forthcoming National School Improvement Resource, and then there's the National Strategy for Educational Research and Inquiry. And on top of all of that, our new and ambitious curriculum for Wales is due to be rolled out in just 4 terms' time, September 2022. Next slide, please, Tom. So it's within this Welsh context, and of course the current global pandemic, with all of the uncertainties that this brings, that I've considered the question of mentoring for today. And I've wondered, and I think about this quite a lot, whether this is the opportunity, whether this complex context provides a great opportunity for us to think about reprioritising and refocusing around mentoring. And I think what I mean by this is, should we be revisiting what we already know, but that might have been lost or maybe faded in the busyness of responding to all of the change and uncertainty? And the more I think about it, the more I wonder whether we should be thinking about those who need to be mentored, but also mentors themselves. And Sally has talked so much about Cardiff Partnership's approach to this today. So in the next few slides, I'd like to think about what mentors need to consider with their mentees, but also I want to talk about, and I feel it's equally important to think about what we as teacher educators and the Cardiff Partnership need to think about for and with our mentors. Another way of thinking about this is imagining 3 concentric circles with mentees nested at the centre and surrounded by the mentors, which are then surrounded by teacher educators or the Cardiff Partnership. So I've thought about a series of themes that I think are important, which I'd like to talk through now. Firstly, I want to think about the professional learning community, of which Sally's mentioned already, and how we and where we establish shared understandings, provide a safe and safe and supportive learning environment, and an environment that's mutual and reciprocal, that has plenty of opportunity for connection and is formed on relationship building. In the same way as I think it takes a school to grow a mentor, I think it takes a community, such as the IT Partnership, to help support and grow excellent mentors. So for me, this is twofold. This is about thinking about how we create that learning community for mentors so that they can get the support and enrichment and the professional learning they need, but then how we want them to be with their mentees, whether those be student teachers or early career teachers. Secondly, I think there's something really important about making and prioritising time, despite how busy we all are. Little and often, perhaps regular check-ins, time opportunity that provides opportunities for dialogue, discussion, and the rehearsing or rehearsal of ideas. Making time to establish trust, for me, is really important. It creates a space that's reassuring, supportive, and non-judgmental, and it encourages openness and honesty. Thinking about this from the point of view of a mentor is important, as it is from a mentee's perspective, and it's necessary to create an environment where they can talk about their concerns at this very unusual time, and have people who can listen, colleagues who can listen to them thinking about the situations they're facing. So I wonder, how do we support and mentor mentors within our school context and also within the partnership? Okay, moving on to the next slide, please, Tom. I want to now think about having a mentor orientation in the same way as I think mentors have a teacher or a mentee orientation. I want to think about how we meet mentors where they are and not where we want them to be, in the same way as I want us to feel equipped to support mentors thinking about their mentees and meeting them where they are. How do we make sure they can undertake the role that we've asked them to take on? I also think related to this is valuing diversity in the mentor community, in the same way as we would want to value diversity in our classrooms. Mentors will be different, they'll approach things differently, and I think there's lots to learn from different approaches in different specific contexts. We need to be sure that our expectations are realistic and manageable, achievable, and not yet another burden in a very complex time. We have to ensure we're not tormentors, adding to the increased demands mentors are facing. And in a very similar way, I think we want to make sure that mentors make things manageable and do not torment mentees. And I guess what I'm talking about here is how we model our practice, how we as the Cardiff Partnership model the ways in which we want our mentors to work with their mentees. And I'm not saying for 1 second that there's only one way to do this. What I'm wondering is and how we model the values, behaviours and approaches, and perhaps the care, the valuing of difference towards our mentors in the way we would want them to do with their mentees, and indeed then the pupils in their classrooms. Next for me is learning together and thinking about considering the essentials of mentors' roles in a difficult and unfamiliar time. And whether we need to think about the essentials of roles, we need to think together, learn together, and think about learning as being mutual. Think about what can be shared, perhaps thinking about how we can embrace uncertainty with it and the uncertainty within which we're operating. How do we get comfortable being uncomfortable? And how can we use this as an opportunity to think differently? Doing it together is much easier than doing it on our own. And we're all in this together, adapting and learning with and alongside each other, problem solving and tackling the challenges we're facing together. As teacher educators with mentors, and as mentors with our mentees, and as teachers with our pupils. Next slide, please, Tom. Okay, we're on to the home straight. 3 final themes. The first is about listening carefully, about listening and not fixing, about reflecting ideas back, checking for understanding. For me, this is about understanding where people are coming from, mentors and their mentees, understanding the experiences they're having, checking we understand those really, really well, sense making. This is so important at the moment when we're asking everyone to adapt and undertake new roles or existing roles in new and unfamiliar ways. How carefully we listen provides a very strong cue as to how much we want others to listen. I also think that there's no one way, there's no blueprint, and what that calls for is a deep and ongoing critical consideration and reflection, mentoring in the moment, being responsive from an informed perspective, thinking about the particular contexts the teachers are working in, the children they're working with, the learning environments that they're situated within, and the broader school and community contexts. We need to embrace diversity and accept that there isn't just one way of being a mentor. Mentors and mentees and their contexts in which they operate are unique. So mentoring approaches need to be similarly varied, bespoke, and adaptable. Finally, I want to talk about the value of questioning and challenging norms and assumptions. Despite the challenging situation everyone is working within, we still need to encourage disruption, to inquire, to seek to understand, and to resist notions of let's not rock the boat, or well, we've always done it this way, or I'm the expert, you're the novice. So in summing up, I know I've talked through a number of ideas, and I think they're more important than ever in terms of mentoring. These are educative mentoring practices, and practices that can nurture and grow educational professionals at all stages of their career. Mentoring is a reciprocal practice, and when done well, can benefit and support everyone. Thank you so much for listening. Diolch yn fawr iawn.
So now it's time to take questions for the panel. I'm Tom Breeze, a senior lecturer here at Cardiff Metropolitan University, and I'm going to be facilitating this Q&A section for the panel. Just before we get started, if we do have too many questions for the time that we have available, Emmajane and Sally have promised to get together and deal with those questions after today. So if you don't hear your question that you've put in the Q&A getting answered today, you can rest assured that we will be sending something out that deals with any additional questions after today. So the first question for the panel is a very topical one, I suppose, which is, has the role of the mentor changed, as so many other things have changed, during COVID times?
Can I come on that one first?
Of course.
My instinct is to say, no, it hasn't. I think the role is the same. I think the platforms that we've used are different, but there's still, you know, if I go back to talking about professional learning, about the support, about the assessment, those aspects of the role have continued to be a feature of mentoring. You know, the fact that people have done things through a telephone, on Teams meetings, through email, a lot more than in the face-to-face. Maybe the frequency of contact has changed, but I think the fundamentals of the role haven't changed. People have found ways around maybe some of the challenges that the role brings, but I would say that they have remained constant.
It's interesting, my thoughts from this are only from the conversations I've had talking to a range of practitioners across Wales. And although some things have changed in terms of perhaps the mode or the way in which mentoring is conducted, the practicalities of it, is it in the classroom, is it online, how that operates, the fundamentals of mentoring haven't really changed. The care, the safe environment, the trust, the building of ideas together, the opportunity to test ideas out, to check for whether something feels right. Those kind of qualities in terms of mentoring, I'm not sure have changed. My only concern is that they're getting sidelined perhaps in the busyness of everybody's day-to-day work. But no, I'm not sure that I feel it's fundamentally changed.
Thank you. Our second question that's come in for this webinar today is around the building of mentoring communities within schools, because we talk about our student teachers going out and being part of a community of peers. You know, we would never send a student teacher out to a school on their own. We always send them in groups. How do we look at creating a mentoring community within a school?
Do you want to go, Emma?
No, I'm happy to pick it up. It's a really great question, and I talked in my presentation about this notion of it takes a school to grow a teacher, and I think mentoring communities are really, really important, and I think they're important for everybody. I think everybody learns, everybody benefits. I think if we consider mentoring from a reciprocal point of view and an educative point of view, then there's lots of advantages to having a mentor community. I think one of the things to think about is how everybody has shared understandings of what mentoring really looks like in a school, and what a particular school's commitment to mentoring is, approach to mentoring is, what that's informed by. There will be mentoring for different reasons. I was really interested a couple of weeks ago. I was listening, the National Academy had Steve Mumby presenting, and he used to be the CEO of the National College for Educational Leadership in the UK, and he was talking that at various points in his career he had multiple mentors, and I think there's something really interesting about the way in which we conceptualize mentoring, and everybody needs a mentor for something, and some people don't feel necessarily that comfortable with that idea, but mentors can really provide an opportunity to challenge thinking, support thinking, and help you see things a different way. So I think there's huge value in establishing, building, creating, and persisting at working at a mentoring community within a school.
And can I follow on from that? That there was well, it's not a question. There's a statement from a new senior mentor in the chat function, asking whether it would be beneficial for mentors to have training directly from the university. Part of the reason for giving the responsibility to the senior mentor was that ability to start developing that community within your school, to work with senior mentors. I found from some of the interviews that I'd done with mentors in school that a senior mentor talks to the mentor about their student and sort of asks them how the student's getting on and have they done their forms. They don't talk to the mentor about their mentoring. That's something that they do by themselves. And I think generating a community where people talk to each other about the mentoring role. And as Emmajane said, that idea of supporting each other, of sharing experiences, of looking at how do you deal with things. If people are working together as part of community, that must make that element of the school provision stronger.
Thank you, Sally. And we have one more question, which has come in from the Q&A. So after this question, we'll be handing back to Anna to wrap the webinar up and ask for your feedback. But the final question is from somebody who obviously was grabbed by this concept of an educative mentoring culture that Emmajane mentioned in her presentation. And so I guess they're asking for a little bit more detail about that. What kind of important things and priorities might we need to put in place in order to create that educative mentoring culture in our schools?
Okay, thanks, Tom. I don't know whether it's possible to pop up some references that were at the end slide, towards the end of my presentation, because there's lots of research out there on this notion of educative mentoring. Fundamentally, there are a number of things within what's termed as educative mentoring that are about reflection, about having a dialogic relationship. So the very last slide, there it is, Tom. Gosh, that's really small. Sorry, everybody. I'm sure we can circulate this if that's helpful post the event. But But there's lots of research about educative mentoring, and this is about the ways of mentoring. This is about reflection, it's about something that's dialogic, it's about something that's disruptive, and disruptive for good, disruptive in a way that makes you question, that makes you have a stance that kind of wonders why we do things. So I think those are really important qualities. There's much more written that I could talk about if that was helpful, but I don't want to take over this this session this afternoon. But really happy to talk more about educative mentoring at another time if that would be useful. Sally, do you want to say anything?
No, I'm going to hand back to Anna now. Thanks, Emmajane.
I guess tonight, just thank you very much to Sally and Emmajane for an excellent insight into the research that they've done. I guess from Sally, your insight into the Cardiff Partnership around mentoring and how you've used evidence base for that work, and also your Ed D and Prof Doc. And I think on one of the questions that have come in, I think it's important to note that where we want to build the mentoring culture in a school within the Cardiff Partnership, you also have a university tutor to bounce some ideas off when you're developing that culture in the first instance as well. Thank you, really, really nice to see you. Thank you, Emmajane, for your wealth of experience and research conducted around this agenda. Some really excellent themes and tips there on how we can really take mentoring forward. I think a key question for us within the Cardiff Partnership is how, as mentors, mentees, do we use research to inform our practice? And we're very happy we can share some references with you. We can put the presentations up on our team site. And also, if it's useful, we could potentially put some readings up as well, to help move everybody forward. I think to round up tonight then, we are really interested in listening to your feedback generically on this webinar series. So if you've been to more than one, we're really interested to hear perhaps around the process that we've adopted with the research webinars, perhaps the topics, the format of the research webinars. So we'd really appreciate it tonight if you could please spend the last couple of minutes writing a short comment that will really inform the way of how we take these research webinars forward. It's been a new initiative for us this year, and we were really hoping that through some of these research webinars, we'd be able to start to enthuse research and inquiry throughout the partnership and to help support our research-informed clinical practice model. So we're interested to hear what you like about the webinars and perhaps how can we also take them forward. So just to conclude, diolch yn fawr iawn I chi gyd am eich amser heno. Diolch yn fawr iawn I Sally ac I Emmajane am y cyflwyniadau arbennig. Bydd y webinar nesaf yn digwydd ar ôl Pasg nawr. Thank you very much to Sally and Emmajane for their excellent insight and presentations on the research-informed mentoring tonight.